This is the second of the videos on helping a loved one pass over. After the first one, we had a webinar in the Spiritual Companions Trust in which we looked at the video and discussed various elements of it and dealt with many questions that arose. So I'm going to tell you what the questions were that arose during the webinar, and then we'll deal with those questions now in this video. They were interesting questions. The first one was, what about your loved one's last words? Shouldn't I help them say whatever is on their mind? I felt that I should have done this with my mother. Someone else then said, yes, there is always unfinished business. It would be good to have it completed before they go. It will bring them relief. And someone else said, when my dad came, there came a point where I felt that I could say, it's okay for you to go now, Dad. And I did say that, and I felt the atmosphere in the room relax, and he died peacefully a few hours later. A hospice nurse responded to that, yeah, that is about letting go. The person dying has to let go. But so do the people in the family around them. There seems, she said, to be a kind of sticky magnetism that can hold people back from passing over. And then someone asked the very pertinent question, which was, all of what you're talking about, William, is about what you call a good death. But what about all those ends of life where there is pain, distress, and fear? What happens then? And someone then added to that, what about suicides and war zones? And then someone said, could I say more about bardo and purgatory? And then finally someone said, what about ghosts? Why are there ghosts? So let's deal with these inquiries from the top. Let's just remember that in the model we're talking about, there are two things going on when you're companioning someone who is dying, or possibly self-managing your own passing over. And those two dynamics are, one, you want the body to be at ease, to just let go. And therefore, as a companion, you behave in a way that helps that person let go. And that's mainly through having an ambience and a mood and an attitude that is relaxed and at ease. And then the person who's moving towards their end of life, can be helped to be at ease. That was one dynamic, the body being at ease. The second dynamic was that consciousness lifts off and is magnetically drawn across into the clear light. And as a companion to that process, as a midwife of that process, you can have a sense of heaven, paradise, the clear light, and your own connection with that clear light can help your friend, your loved one, pass over to it more easily. Now, that first question was about somebody saying that they felt that their mother had words she still wanted to say, and someone else then commented, well, yes, they had felt that there was unfinished business. And listen, you have to be very careful here, because I understand quite poignantly that that may well be topmost in your heart and your mind, but it's your agenda. It's your agenda. It's not the agenda of the person who is dying. In a sense, you're kind of projecting onto them what you think would be a good completion. And there may be in you a kind of expectation that they should say this stuff that will help them be complete, or that you should say some stuff that will help the relationship be complete. I understand that, but at the end of life, if you're companioning someone, your attitude should be one of complete patience and generosity. and not going in there with any kind of agenda about what should or shouldn't be said or what should or should not be completed. That said, it will only ever do good if you say, I love you. It will only ever do good if you say, forgive me for whatever I may have done. But it's not the right time or place to get involved in the emotional and psychological dynamics of completing what may have been a difficult relationship. Family relationships are difficult. And to expect a clean completion is often to expect too much. It may happen. I hope it does happen for you. But I really suggest to you kind of back off with your agenda, no matter how well intentioned, that your loved ones should unload, unburden themselves of whatever they should unburden themselves of. That said, of course, there are situations where a priest may come in and there's a form of confession take place, but that's only appropriate if the loved one who's passing over, that's part of their culture, and they go, yes, this is how I can be at ease. So you have to take your cues very sensitively from the person who's passing over. If in doubt, zip it up. On the other hand, if you get a sense that there's a conversation arising, allow it to arise. Somebody in the Q&A then went on to say, but they had a sense it was useful for them. They had a kind of inner nudge that said to them that they wanted to say to their dad, it's okay if you go now, Dad. It's all right. And I know, speaking with that person afterwards, they felt a little bit of confusion, shame about whether that was somehow or rather inappropriate. But, in these situations, the process is one of letting go. The person who's dying at one level needs to just let go. And equally, the people accompanying that person needs to help them let go. And that letting go comes from the carers, the companions, the family, actually doing something that's quite difficult because it will take them into grief and into loss. But it's one of, I let you go. Loved one, beloved of my heart, I let you go. Because this is the process of life. I let you go. So in that context, it may have been absolutely appropriate to say, it's time, Dad. Yeah, it's fine, you can let go. I remember one situation where somebody towards the end of their life, and this is not uncommon, was saying, I'm in a bus station. I'm in a bus station. Oh, and why am I in a bus station? There are all these buses. And somebody who is unpracticed in care would say, no, you're not in a bus station, dear. You're in bed at home or in the hospice. No, not in a bus station. But in the context of letting go and being at ease with the person, actually the appropriate communication is, oh, you're in the bus station, are you? You're going to catch a bus? Might be okay to catch a bus, because the bus station and the bus is obviously a metaphor for the transition of passing over. But in all these things, you just need to be careful and sensitive and patient and relaxed and at ease. I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry. I'm going to repeat myself again. If in doubt, zip it up and just be kind. In that context, it's a well-known phenomenon that in hospitals and hospices, people will tend to die in the early hours of the morning, 3-4 o'clock, when nobody else is around. And it seems that if people are around, there's a kind of sticky magnetism that holds the person moving towards the end of their life in their bed. I remember when my own mum passed over, and she was one of these people who didn't like being touched. You know, if you're with someone who's passing over, you need to be very careful as to whether you hold their hand or don't hold their hand. My mum was one of those people, she didn't want a handhold. I'm not one of these people who likes to be touched, but there are others for whom it would be very, very comforting to be touched. And in that context, about 12 hours before she passed over, I looked at that she was in hospital. I said to the medical staff, the doctors, I said, don't touch her anymore. I had to say it quite cleanly, don't touch her anymore, just leave her be. And they went, yeah, they respected my wishes. And there was somebody else in the webinar who said that she had done that with her mother as well. But it requires just a little bit of assertiveness sometimes, a little bit of courage to say to the carers, no, it's time to back off and just let this person be at peace, because people tend to pass over when nobody's there. I remember my sister and I were taking it in turns to care for our mum, and there was a half-hour gap between me leaving and my sister coming in, and in that space she passed over. She was left alone. She was free. There was no magnetism holding her back. So let's move on to the more tricky issue that was raised in the webinar, which was, I'm talking about a good death where the body just gives way and consciousness passes over. What about bad deaths where there's suffering and pain? Yes, they happen, and there are many deaths that are not beautiful and graceful and involve pain. And in those cases, more than ever, as a companion, you are called upon to be calm and loving and caring. Imagine that you're a nurse or a medic or a carer in a hospice with someone who is having a difficult death, and there's a family member that's kind of bothered and agitated, that it's not a helpful presence. On the other hand, if you're there just very kind and quiet and soft and holding, and you have to be a little bit courageous and tough here, and have some discipline to just hold the space of being kind and quiet and a generous, big-hearted presence that will be welcomed by the care staff. And your atmosphere will communicate to them as well and be helpful. The individual who is ending their life in a state of suffering, that is difficult for them and it's difficult to witness. But come the moment that the body does finally just subside, then consciousness will lift off and be magnetically carried over into the clear light. The suffering will not hold them back. So you need to be patient and trusting of the grace and the flow that happens in passing over. Then in suicides and war zones, it's the same situation. The circumstances are horrible. There may be physical pain. There may be torture and terrible suffering, but when the body dies, consciousness will lift off and be drawn across. It's inevitable, because, as I say, Earth is very tiny given the size of the cosmos, and there's a benevolence in the cosmos that is bigger than the pain on little planet Earth, and it will draw those who've died across into the clear light. There may be a temporary period of confusion for the people who die in suicides or crashes or war zones or disasters. But inevitably they pass over. And now we're going to go into an area which is just fractionally more mystical and metaphysical, maybe a step too far for some of you. On the other hand, it may be something that's completely acceptable and part of your philosophy of life. And that is that there is help in the universe. There are angels. There are wonderful saintly beings on the other side, and they help people pass over when there are difficult circumstances. So in those horrific situations, be certain that there are invisible beings there to help the person across. And there are also some people alive who part of their meditation practice is to allow their consciousness to go out to places where there's pain and suffering and help people pass over. It's been part of my daily practice for almost 50 years. And in that context, which is more metaphysical and mystical, someone, of course, lobbed in, what about ghosts? Okay, let me just have a little sip of my tea. And I'll spend a minute on ghosts. Again, this may be a step too far in relation to your philosophy of life, but here's a possibility. Imagine someone who's been in a violent mood for a couple of decades and who's also alcoholic. Violent mood, alcohol or drugs like heroin. And they die, and their consciousness is so still caught up in that violent mood that for a while, temporarily, that ambience, that vibration of violence and anger and alcohol and drugs is so great that they shield themselves from the magnetism of the clear light. And they're just hanging around for a while. And sometimes they can get so intense and focused that they can actually move things. It happens. There are too many stories about this kind of phenomenon. Ultimately, they too pass over. And if you by any chance encounter one of those beings, your job will be to be very kind, very present, and ask for help in order to enable them to pass over. On the metaphysical and mystical side, I will do a third video, which is more explicit about the metaphysical and mystical aspects of passing over. And anyway, I hope this one has answered some of the questions that arose for you from the first video, and I hope that it's been useful.